Okay, this is the Jazz History 2 um, review lecture on the Cool School. Actually, you can use it as any, you could use it as a lesson if you like. But I just want to give you, we're going to cover it in class, but I just want to give you the main points about Cool School that I need you to understand um, in order to know it the way I want you to know it. Okay, Cool School is the period that directly follows bebop. And it's a it's a it's a reaction by bebop musicians to the brashness and excitement and frantic quality of bebop. The fathers of Cool School are Lester Young on tenor saxophone and Count Basie on piano, even though strangely enough you wouldn't count either one of them as Cool School musicians. Stan Getz on the tenor saxophone and Miles Davis on the trumpet were mainstays of the Cool School movement. In 1949 and in 1950, um, Miles Davis released an album called The Birth of the Cool. Miles Davis, up to this point, of course, had been Charlie Parker's frontline partner in his quintet. But in 1949 and 1950, he organized a 9-piece band known as the Birth of the Cool Band. And here is a tune called Boplicity. Okay, so this is Boplicity. This is like the Cool School anthem. When you hear this, this is the Birth of the Cool album by Miles Davis. Okay, so that's Boplicity. Um, and one of the things that you should recognize about this when you're listening to Cool School is the fact that this music is much more arranged than the music in bebop was. The music in bebop was based on spontaneity. This is more arranged. The solos are shorter. the contour of the melodic lines and the solo lines is much more understated and much smoother. Um, this is actually a group that Miles put together. It's a smaller version of the Claude Thornhill Band. I want you to hear Snowfall by Claude Thornhill. This is Snowfall. Claude Thornhill was a pianist. When you listen to this music, there's a mellower sound to it than most of the big band music that was going on in the 1940s. There are several reasons for that other than the writing. First of all, they used unusual woodwind instruments, flutes, clarinets, which was unusual for a and they also used tuba and French horn, which hadn't been used up to this point. I mean, we get tuba from way back in the Dixieland days, before string bass became the most prominent bass instrument. But that's the sound that Miles heard from this group that he wanted to include in his music. Interesting video montage of snow. Great. So that's Snowfall by Claude Thornhill Band. Now, actually, there's an association. Well, let's take a look at the no-net first. The instrumentation of the no-net is Lee Konitz on alto saxophone, Jerry Mulligan on baritone saxophone. There was no tenor saxophone in this group. John Lewis on piano, Al McKibben on bass, Max Roach on drums. Get you down here. On the French horn, we have Junior Collins. Actually, if you look on the album credits, there are several French horn players because this album is recorded over some period of time. On trombone, we have Mike Zwerin. On tuba, Bill Barber, and also Miles Davis on the trumpet. So this group has a decidedly West Coast sound, which we will talk about that, which is kind of ironic because the project came together in New York City and was the product of many meetings at another musician that became very important in Miles Davis's career, an arranger for the Claude Thornhill Band by the name of Gil Evans. And they all met in Gil Evans' basement apartment on 57th Street to put this group together and formulate the idea of this kind of understated, very heavily arranged music. It's a sound that's reminiscent of the Count Basie band much more than the collaboration of Miles and Dizzy Gillespie. I mean, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. Also, an important element of what happened in this group with Gil Evans. Gil and Miles went on to collaborate on quite a few albums. In this period, we had this music called third stream jazz, which is an attempt to forge classical music with jazz. Most of the time, in my view, it's not very successful, but Miles and Gil did 4 of, well, let's say 3.5 of the most important third stream jazz recordings, as well as Gil working with Miles on his arrangements. It's said that he had something to do with Kind of Blue, which I don't doubt. Okay, I'm pausing this a lot, but that's because I want it to be watchable. Another group that has a lot of longevity is the Modern Jazz Quartet. It's also an example of the sound of Cool School, even though this is often thought of as a bebop group. And as a matter of fact, we mentioned it as a bebop group in the last section. Okay, I'm going to screen share this. This is the Modern Jazz Quartet playing Baggs Groove. Baggs is the nickname for Milt Jackson, by the way, who's the vibes player. I mean, you can obviously see how the timbre fits right into the Cool School sound. This group stays together until 1974. And the way they got together is this began with John Lewis on the piano and Percy Heath on bass and Milt Jackson on vibes as the rhythm section for the Dizzy Gillespie Big Band. That's how these guys met. Very understated, but the language, the harmonic language, is the same as bebop, the same type of chromaticism. This has often been described, the sound of this has been described as chamber jazz, and much of Cool School could be described that way. is a really good example of listening to jazz very closely, picking out an instrument and following it through the piece of music to see how it relates to the other musicians. All right, so that's Bag's Groove by the Modern Jazz Quartet. So the focus of much of this period is on the West Coast, even though it's a national movement and much of it occurs on the East Coast as well, specifically Miles' Birth of the Cool. So the next thing we're going to hear is the Metronome All-Stars in 1950, playing a piece of music entitled No Figs, composed by pianist Lenny Tristano. Now the title No Figs refers to the fact that when bebop became the focal point of jazz evolution, there were many people from the swing era that could not comprehend or could not fit into what the bebop people were doing, and they had a negative reaction against bebop, obviously. But the bebop people, who had their own little names for everything, nicknamed them Moldy Figs. So that's the reference in this title, No Figs. Okay, so this is No Figs by the Metronome All-Stars in 1950. That's Lee Konitz on alto saxophone. Stan Getz on the tenor saxophone, who's later to become a big star on his own. Okay, that's Kai Winding on the trombone. The trombone makes a reappearance as a solo instrument. Buddy DeFranco on the clarinet, another instrument that disappeared in the bebop era. Serge Chaloff on the baritone saxophone. Lenny Tristano on the piano. Okay, so that's No Figs by the Metronome All Stars. So the tune on No Figs, just like they did in the bebop era, is actually a chromatic melody that was composed by Lenny Tristano on a standard tune called Way Back Home in Indiana. And that's the chord progression. It's a very standard tune, very, very well known, played a lot in the Dixieland era. So the people in the Metronome All Stars that you heard is Buddy DeFranco on clarinet, Kai Winding on trombone, Lee Konitz on alto saxophone, Stan Getz on the tenor saxophone, Serge Chaloff on baritone saxophone, Billy Bauer on guitar, Lenny Tristano on the piano, Eddie Safransky on bass, and Max Roach on drums. And so obviously there's no trumpet. One of the things that you might notice in the recording that I just played of Back Home in Indiana is that the solos are very short. Instead of taking chorus after chorus of improvisation like they do in bebop, these solos were 8 bars long and nobody gets an entire chorus of the tune. They divide the chorus into 8-bar sections and everybody gets 8 bars of the tune. Possibly because they wanted to put it on a 78 so they could release it in 1950 as the Metronome All Stars. Okay, so Lenny Tristano is a pianist. He's the composer of No Figs. He's a band leader and he's an educator. He creates a modern jazz alternative to bebop. Tristano makes his most substantial mark through his students, and these students carry on tradition. Students like Lee Konitz, Warren Marsh, Billy Bauer, and then there are scores of professionals that I know that got their education, jazz education, from the second wave from Tristano's students, not from Tristano himself. Art Tatum and Lester Young are particularly strong influences on his piano style. I think you can hear the influence of Art Tatum in the in the substitute chords, and then the smoothness of the solo lines as Lester Young played the tenor saxophone. Lenny Tristano is a devotee of Johann Sebastian Bach, and he requires his students to learn Bach, learn Bach's approach to counterpoint by analyzing, and then he requires them to improvise their own music in the style of Bach, which you may or may not know, much of the music that Bach performed was improvisation. He was a master improviser. Tristano doesn't use the cliches of Parker and Gillespie. He makes use of a lot of chord substitutions, as well as long melodic phrases that are less erratic than bebop, but certainly no less dissonant or chromatic. Tristano experiments with free jazz. There are 2 performances that he records. One is called Intuition, and the other is known as Digression. And these are trend-setting in the fact that there are no preconceived notion of melody, tempo, meter, harmony, and form. Although you can hear hints of it here. And as I suggested in class, the term free jazz is a misnomer, because free would suggest that you put no limitations on the music. But as soon as you say that you can't have any preconceived notions of melody, tempo, meter, harmony, or form, you've set parameters on the music, so it's no longer free. So let's take a listen to Intuition. Okay, let's get Intuition up here. even though it's free of constraints, there's still a markedly unified concept of the eighth note time. Okay, so that's Intuition by Lenny Tristano, and you heard the usual cast of characters playing there that usually accompany Lenny Tristano. So this is Tristano experimenting with free jazz, if you want to call it that. So the performances of Intuition and Digression are trend-setting in the industry. I think Intuition, the reason I picked that one is because I think it's more interesting than the Digression. This free jazz effort by Lenny Tristano precedes the efforts of Ornette Coleman and Cecil Taylor by a decade. And Ornette and Cecil Taylor got most of the credit for inventing free jazz. Tristano didn't record very much. He recorded about the equivalent of 7 33 and a third long playing records. He spends most of his time teaching. 33 and a third long PM records are about 40 minutes of recorded music. So you could do the math if you want to know how much music he actually recorded. Bill Evans and Cecil Taylor are the only two well-known pianists that consider themselves Lenny Tristano disciples. His most talented students actually play other instruments. Lee Konitz on the alto, Warren Marsh on tenor, and guitarist Billy Bauer. Lee Konitz is an amazing alto saxophonist. He contributes a new sound to jazz. He develops a style and sound when most people are trying to imitate, most young alto saxophonists are imitating Charlie Parker. Lee Konitz develops his own approach. He plays with a light, airy tone, a slow vibrato, and he sounds like the equivalent of Lester Young on the alto saxophone. Okay, so the big bands of the Cool School era now, because we're now more interested in arranging than we were in bebop. Obviously, larger groups of more musicians, of people that could read music, become more interesting to the jazz composers. There are a couple Cool School big bands, but the one that's most known as a Cool School big band is Stan Kenton. Now, my composition teacher in college composed for Stan Kenton, and I heard a lot of Stan's bands and knew Stan fairly well. He leads a succession of big bands that play many different styles. The group is based on the West Coast and employs many of the West Coast Cool School musicians. Even though it's considered a Cool School big band, the band is really doesn't sound cool. I mean, we call it a Cool School big band, mostly because it's primarily concerned with arrangement rather than improvisation, and because of the time that it happens, the time frame that it happens. All right, this piece is from 1948 by the Stan Kenton Orchestra, and it's entitled Monotony. And I didn't pick the piece because it's monotonous. That just happens to be the title. So let's listen to Stan Kenton in 1948. That's Stan Kenton playing the piano. Okay, so that's Monotony by Stan Kenton. As a composer and arranger and band leader, Kenton's influenced very heavily by Claude Thornhill. And if you want to go back and check out Snow Fall Again, you hear that the brass sound is very similar to the brass sound that Stan Kenton's using. So he's influenced by Claude Thornhill, but he's also influenced by Fletcher Henderson. And he's influenced by an alto saxophonist that doubles on trumpet by the name of Benny Carter, not Betty Carter, Benny, Benny, Benny Carter. As a pianist, Kenton's very heavily influenced by Earl Hines, whose playing was dubbed trumpet style piano because of his heavy hitting on the keys, for one thing. Earl Hines started out as a trumpet player, but also because of the fact that Earl Hines improvised melodic lines at a time when most pianists weren't doing that. Kenton creates a big band style. It's immediately recognizable. His most impressive work was non-swinging concert music, which used mass brass and modern harmonies. A classical feeling is common in Stan's music. So even though Kenton's band has a very wide dynamic range, in other words, from very soft sounds to very loud dynamics, it's known as the loudest big band, which I think it probably is. One of the things that he did in the swing era, the big bands had a tendency to have the trumpets play in mutes, things to muffle the sound, sort of. And Stan got rid of the mutes entirely. Well, not entirely, but he used them for color as they were intended to be used, rather than a way of lessening the sound of those brass section. His instrumentation for his band most of the time was 5 trumpets, which is a lot of trumpets. Most big bands 3 or 4 trumpets, 5 trombones, but which is unusual, usually 3 or 4 trombones. But of the 5 trombones, 2 of them were bass trombones, which makes the group very bottom heavy. 5 saxophones, which isn't unusual, except that Stan used one alto saxophonist at the top of the section as the high saxophonist, and he also used 2 baritone saxophones at the bottom with the same effect that we get in the trombones with the 2 bass trombones. His rhythm sections, piano, bass, drums, and often a conga player. When I heard the band all the time, he had a conga player by the name of Ramon Lopez. At one point, he even has 5 mellophones in the band, which if you're in the Marching 97, or if you're in a marching band, you know, are basically French horns with a forward-facing bell. The trombone section is a smooth sounding 5-way voiced sound. The trombones tend to play in the upper register like Tommy Dorsey. A direct comparison with the Basie band, Count Basie's band is very easy and swinging. It has a light feel, while Kenton's band is serious and intense and has, in my view, a very heavy feel. Kenton's music is essentially 20th century concert music scored for trumpets, trombone, saxes, and rhythm section. Now, there's one piece of music that I want to play for you that is one of my favorites and was actually one of Stan's favorites, but was not one of the favorites of his fans. It's a piece called City of Glass by Stan Kenton, composed by a guy named Bob Grettinger, Graetinger. I'm sure he composed lots of stuff and did a lot of arranging, but this is the only thing I've ever really heard of his. So let me pull that up. And this is City of Glass, the first movement, by Bob Grettinger, played by the Stan Kenton Orchestra. One really great thing about recording these is we can listen to the entire piece of music, which we don't have time for in class. And also, this might also be something, these videos, in addition to the classroom lectures, it might be a good idea to listen to them, just put them on and listen to them, so you can hear the music in a more casual fashion. But this is City of Glass by Bob Grettinger, the first movement. You can he also uses strings on this, which is fairly unusual for a big band, particularly using them in this way. I mean, there was a band leader named Freddie King who had a string section, but that was mostly for commercial purposes. This is atonal, serial type 20th century classical music for a jazz band. guitar that's very unusual in Stan Kenton's band. Okay, so that's the first movement of City of Glass, called Structures, by the Stan Kenton Orchestra. All right, so after hearing that, you might say that doesn't sound very cool to me, and I would agree with you. But the band's character is based on elaborate arrangements, and arranging is part of the cool school. That's what identifies cool school. It's one of the primary criteria for labeling a band a cool school band. That factor and the location and time of the band put it in that category. This is counter to the simplicity and swing of the Basie band. In fact, a lot of people thought Kenton's band didn't really swing, and it doesn't in the traditional sense. Although there are some tremendous swing players and great players that come out of it. So while the Basie band functions in like a big combo, and the focus is on improvisation, and the backgrounds are functional, which is the Kansas City style of big band writing. Kenton's band functions like a brass choir. Composition is the primary focus, and the solos are routinely swallowed by the volume and complexity of the ensemble. Also, I might add that I played a lot of this style music growing up, and the solos were very short. You did not get minutes of solos, you got seconds of solos. And usually, as I said, got swallowed up by the ensemble. Kenton's great gift is as a motivator and a discoverer of great talent. He's also a public relations expert, and he has a talent for directing modern musicians and composers. And in addition to that, something that I'm very grateful for is that he is actually the founder of the modern jazz education movement. We wouldn't be having this class right now, or it wouldn't have happened the way it did as long ago as it did without Stan Kenton. He began leading big bands in 1941 and continued leading them until he got sick. And when he passed, I believe in 1978. Okay, so let's continue. Now, those are some major trends: the birth of the cool band by Miles Davis, the Lenny Tristano School on the West Coast, Stan Kenton big band on the West Coast. There's certainly a lot of music going on during this time, and it's ironic because I would say the period would be dated somewhere between 1948 and 1953. That's all the longer it lasts, really. But there's a tremendous amount of very creative music that goes on during that short period of time. I also would like to mention that the birth of the cool band, which was the flagship for this type of jazz, um, released the albums. It did not release all of the Birth of the Cool on one record, or one like we have today. At the time, they were still using 78 RPM records, and the tunes from the Birth of the Cool came out two at a time, on A and B sides of a 78 RPM record, which has, each side has approximately 3 minutes of recording time. So Capitol Records slowly releases these sides from the time it was created, from about 1949, slowly but surely, uh, but not as an offering, a complete offering. So that group and that recording did not have the immediate impact it would have had, say, it was released, such like Kind of Blue was, or Sketches of Spain, or Bitches Brew, or any of those other great Miles Davis records. It wasn't until 1954 that Capitol Records released the entire collection on a 33 and a third RPM album. And the group really did not perform either. So nobody heard them as a performing group. They had, I believe, 2 weeks, and that's it. That's all the more performing they did. So the rest of the music that we're going to explore from this period, we're going to listen to primarily through the following the instrumentalists. So the primary instrumentalist of the Cool School by instrument, for trumpet players, Miles Davis is by far the most famous. But there's another trumpet player named Chet Baker, who gains his initial exposure with the Jerry Mulligan Quartet in 1952 and 1953. And let's hear a little bit of Chet Baker playing But Not For Me, which is a standard tune. By the way, he also sings. Okay, so let's get this up here. This is But Not For Me by Chet Baker. If it were a video performance, I would make it full screen, but these are all photo montages over the music. So this is Chet Baker.
They're writing songs of love, but not for me. A lucky stars above, but not for me. With love to lead the way, I've found more clouds of gray than any Russian play could guarantee. I was a fool to fall and get that way. Hi-ho, alas, and also lack a day. Although I can't dismiss the memory of her kiss, I guess she's not for me. was a fool to fall and get that way. Hi-ho, alas, and also lack a day. Although I can't dismiss the memory of her kiss, I guess she's not for me.
Okay, so that's Chet Baker, but not for me. We're recording again. Oh, great. So we never stopped. Okay. So Chet Baker is an instrumentalist that is a little bit different than the other guys of this period. First of all, he plays by ear, so he's not somebody that sits down and figures out chromatic harmonies. As a matter of fact, he virtually uses no chromatic harmony at all. The beautiful thing about Chet Baker is his gift for melody. And as a friend of mine, John McNeil, explains in one of his books, um, his ability to improvise melodies by ear approaches genius level most of the time. It's almost as if he's writing the song. In that way, he's a lot like Miles Davis. He records prolifically with rhythm sections until he dies in 1988. He played easy swinging solos, but he's also known for his wistful singing voice, which is really remarkably similar to his trumpet playing. Okay, another West Coast trumpet player is a trumpet player by the name of Shorty Rogers, and mostly because of his stature. He's based in Los Angeles. He plays the trumpet and he writes for the Stan Kenton Orchestra, as well as various things around LA. One of the things that you hear in these big bands and is a very almost classical sound to the instrument. And one of the reasons for that is a lot of these guys were working in the movie theaters in Hollywood doing soundtracks for movies. Matter of fact, in one class, somebody said, it sounds like movie music. Well, you know, a lot of it has to do with the instrumental proficiency of the musicians playing the music. Dickie's Dream is by a group called Shorty Rogers and His Giants. And let me pause this and pull it up. Okay, so we're going to get Dickie's Dream up here by Shorty Rogers and His Giants. Oh, what did I do? Okay, Shorty Rogers and His Giants. Dickie. bassy rhythm section. You're the guitar strumming on every beat, matching the bass and the ride cymbal. That's very swingy, right? Rhythm section. Okay, so that's Shorty Rogers and his Giants performing Dickie's Dream. Shorty Rogers produces his own musical projects with a series of combos and big bands. He makes recordings with a reed man, Jimmy Jufrey, who we're going to hear in a minute, and a vibraphonist, Teddy Charles, of improvisations, again, not based on prearranged chord progressions and other more free stuff. Okay, so let's talk about the saxophonist. The Cool School saxophonists maintain the tone quality of Lester Young as opposed to the edgy sound of Charlie Parker. And most of them played with Stan Kenton or Woody Herman. Now, in some ways, because of the arranging and also the location of the band, I consider the Woody Herman band a Cool School band. However, I know people that play on the Ghost band, the Woody Herman band that's still traveling around, even though Woody's dead, and they get very defensive when you start saying that their band is a Cool School band. They very much want to be hard bop or bebop, and I can understand that. So the first saxophonist we're going to talk about is Jimmy Jufrey, and Jufrey spelled Giuffre. He plays with a really soft and diffuse sound on all the instruments he plays. And like a lot of West Coast instrumentalists, because he plays a lot of film work, he also plays saxophone and flute and clarinet and a lot of the other woodwinds. He plays understated lines. He uses a lot of space when he plays, and he plays very much in the style of Lester Young. He was a very original composer and improviser. He performs on clarinet and the low register, and he is one of the most creative and original improvisers. This thing we're going to hear is a tune called "The Train and the River" by Jimmy Jufrey, and it's program music, like program music such as Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun by Debussy, or Sorcerer's Apprentice, or any of those classical pieces. The Rhenish Symphony by Schumann, which is about the Rhine Valley. And anyway, there's a lot of them, but it's music that conjures up a visual image. So we're going to hear "The Train and the River." Okay, so let me pull this up here. Oh, I do have to apologize. I just hit share sound on my computer screen, so I'm hoping that you've heard the music that I've been playing. I might have to do this again, but we'll find out. Okay, this is "The Train and the River" by Jimmy Jufrey. We also have Jim Hall on guitar. Right, that really is one of my favorite pieces that I get to play during the semester. Um, okay, so when you listen to Jimmy Jufrey, he's very creative rhythmically. West Coast saxophone players employ a lighter sound than Parker, and they sound like they're playing swing era solos with bebop flavoring. The next saxophone player is Paul Desmond, who's an alto saxophonist. That's really what he's known for. He's highly regarded for his good taste, his melodic continuity. He has a fertile imagination, and he has accurate intonation. He achieves his greatest fame working with Dave Brubeck. Paul Desmond has a very original style that's free of cliche, as most of these guys. I mean, there's something special about each one of them. He's not a disciple of Charlie Parker or Lenny Tristano. I have a listening example here of Paul Desmond playing Tangerine. Let me pull that up. Oh, and for this one, you even get to see the music go by. So this is Tangerine, which is a famous standard tune, actually. Tangerine. All right, so so that's a great example of his improvisation on a beautiful standard tune. It's great that they wrote it out. It's so inventive and clear. One of the other places that he really, well, where he gained a tremendous amount of fame was playing with Dave Brubeck. And the tune Take Five, of course, was very famous. And this is also Dave Brubeck playing piano, who's a Cool School pianist. And we'll be getting to him in a minute. Okay, so let's see if we can get Take Five up here. Okay, so hopefully this is Take Five. Yeah, there we go. '72. And I didn't realize that's Jerry Mulligan on baritone saxophone. We're also going to talk. That's Paul Desmond playing. This is not the original. Take time. Sorry about it. Okay, I'm going to stop that for a minute. As much as I like this, I'm going to play the original Take Five. Okay, so this is the original Take Five. Not that the other one wasn't good, but I want you to hear the original. And of course, it looks very much like the other one until they start playing. So we're here to hear Paul Desmond, not the rest of the group. Okay, so Paul Desmond. Another person, this is actually my favorite alto player from the Cool School, Art Pepper, who's associated with Stan Kenton. His influences are Zoot Sims and Lee Konitz, but he plays more aggressively and with a brighter sound than most of the Cool School players, which is probably why I like him. He's a very emotional improviser with a hard and primal sound and feel. He's also influenced by John Coltrane. For a listening example, I have him playing Fascinating Rhythm, which is one of my favorite of these recordings. Okay, so we're going to hear some Fascinating Rhythm. So that's Art Pepper playing Fascinating Rhythm, one of my favorite of these recordings. Okay, the next one, Jerry Mulligan, who is the premier baritone saxophonist of the Cool School. He's also the primary arranger for the Breath of the Cool sections of 1949 and 1950. I'm going to play a piece of Jerry Mulligan with one of my teachers, Bob Brookmeyer, and we're going to kill two birds with one stone because Bob Brookmeyer is a Cool School trombonist, but he plays valve trombone rather than regular trombone. So this is a recording of Jerry Mulligan with valve trombonist Bob Brookmeyer. Okay, so we get a lot of good videos for this period.
Play a last tune.
Bernie's tune is this tune.
End it. Play the finale. And it's especially sad when we're enjoying ourselves so much and we have such a good audience. But nonetheless, it has to be done. But before we do play the finale, I'd like to acknowledge the members of the quartet. On drums, Dave Bailey. On bass, Joe Benjamin. And Bob Brookmeyer.
So you get to hear the count.
The last one's going to be Bernie's tune.
Jerry Mulligan on baritone sax. there's a tremendous amount of interesting counterpoint between the baritone saxophone and the valve trombone, which is one of the things. The fact that they don't have a pianist in the group really gives them a great deal of improvisational freedom, although they're playing very traditional stuff. Yeah, Jerry Mulligan also wrote for Claude Thornhill and Stan Kenton. He uses a dry, soft sound. He uses a dry, soft sound on the Barry. His solos are more predictable and logical than beboppers, which is what I was mentioning before. He moves to California and starts a series of pianoless quartets. The most famous partner that he had in this regard is Chet Baker. There's a wonderful recording of My Funny Valentine, but you've heard Chet and you've heard Jerry, so we're not gonna do any more with that right now. On drums, Chico Hamilton is probably the premier drummer. Now, one of the things about this period is that drummers became more like orchestral percussionists. In other words, they colored more than they played time, more than they delineated the time. And Chico Hamilton was the drummer for the first pianoless quartet that Jerry Mulligan had. He then forms his own group. It's a quintet, and the instrumentation is guitar, cello, bass, drums, and the saxophonist who plays flute and clarinet. And it's a highly arranged group that sort of resembles chamber music. Jimmy Giuffre was one of the first of the woodwind players that Chico Hamilton uses. The texture of the group's very light. He's one of the first drummers to use the snare drum and tom-toms of the drum kit to replace the ride cymbal. Let's take a listen to Caravan. Now, this is a piece of music that's composed by Juan Tizol from the Ellington Band, a valve trombonist from the Ellington Band, but this is given a special treatment by Chico Hamilton, a very cool school treatment of Caravan. That's Jim Hall, the guitarist that we heard with Jimmy Giuffre on the Train and the River. One of the great jazz guitarists of all time. See how arranged this. And again, he uses the tom-toms and the snare drum rather than the ride. drummer. Oh, but you get the idea. That's about half of that. Okay, go on to on guitar, Jim Hall. He is the guitarist that we just heard, also the guitarist on The Train in the River, recorded with Chico Hamilton and obviously Jimmy Giuffre. He's a major influence for many modern guitarists, and his influence rivals that of Wes Montgomery, who is one of the main guitar kings. I mean, one of the people that really changes the sound of the guitar. He's not a busy technical guitarist. He plays very tastefully. On piano, Dave Brubeck is the most famous. His recording of Take Five he receives international fame because of that recording. And Blue Rondo a la Turk, which I will play, from 1951 until 1957, he leads a quartet with alto saxophonist Paul Desmond, whom we heard. His playing is somewhat reminiscent of classical music. He spends time studying with the French composer Darius Milhaud, who was one of the French composers of Les Six, a group of composers in the 20s that were heavily influenced by jazz. Brubeck doesn't use the bebop language of Parker and Gillespie. His music is prettier and lighter than bop. He explores odd time signatures used in jazz, but not too deeply. And he has a huge hit with Take Five. This is Blue Rondo a la Turk, or at least some of it. So yes, as I said, this is Blue Rondo a la Turk. And you'll recognize this. I know you've heard this. Very famous piece of music. This is in 9/8. So every bar has 9 beats in it, and the 8th note gets the beat. It's interesting to hear. It's good. That's decided this field. Now we're playing intervals of 9/8. Well, we certainly heard plenty of Paul Desmond. This is Dave Brubeck playing. so he almost swings there. Okay, so you've heard Bob Brookmeyer play with Jerry Mulligan, also a trombonist named Carl Fontana. He's very technically adept. He also plays with Woody Herman and Stan Kenton, and Bob Brookmeyer. We've heard, of course. Now, so these guys represent a resurgence of the trombone into the music. Now, as I said before, it may be a little tedious getting through all this stuff, but you have this video for repeated listening. But there's a lot more to Cool School that we've actually covered. Many more musicians, trumpet players. I didn't talk about Conti Candoli, and there's another guy that just passed away. I can't recall his name right now. But these guys did studio work in LA, in addition to being jazz musicians. So, so for the popular appeal of this, Cool School, Miles Davis and Stan Getz are very popular, as is Dave Brubeck, and as was the Modern Jazz Quartet. The rest of the musicians don't gain that. Jack Sheldon is the other trumpet player. Don't gain that kind of fame. Lenny Tristano, Lee Konitz, and Jimmy Giuffre are not popular, but they are very influential. So, in review of this period, cool jazz is a term applied to modern styles that sound subdued because of the light, dry tone qualities, little or no vibrato, and low volume. The music is more relaxed and more melodic than bebop, I should say. Cool jazz draws upon the styles of Lester Young and Count Basie in the 30s, Lenny Tristano and Lee Konitz in the 40s, and Claude Thornhill and the Miles Davis Nonet in the 40s and 50s. Much of cool jazz is undistinguishable from bebop, and Stan Getz, George Shearing, and the Modern Jazz Quartet belong to both periods. As we talked about, Stan Kenton leads a string of modern, innovative big bands, heavily influenced by Claude Thornhill. Kenton's repertoire is of the 50s contains ambitious concert works resembling 20th century classical music. West Coast style refers to cool jazz played by predominantly white LA-based musicians in the 1950s. Most of them, or many of them, are alumni of the Stan Kenton and Woody Herman bands. Jerry Mulligan, Chico Hamilton, Dave Brubeck, and Shorty Rogers are prominent West Coast band leaders. Paul Desmond, Art Pepper, Jimmy Giuffre, and Jerry Mulligan are the prominent West Coast saxophonists. Chet Baker, Shorty Rogers, Jack Sheldon, Conti Candoli are prominent West Coast trumpet players, as was Chet Baker sometimes. Carl Fontana, Frank Rossellino, and Bob Brookmeyer are prominent West Coast trombonists. So this is a very succinct sort of look at Cool School. All of these periods are far more involved than what we're covering. If you are interested in this music, you certainly have enough of a footing in it to explore it further. So anyway, thank you very much. And that's Cool School. We'll be back with Hard Bop.